the directed energy weapons do not explain the presence of the explosive residue. I said, first you have to explain the presence of that residue, and then I'll tell you why directed energy weapons aren't even possible. And that pissed him off. He came back with all kinds of cuss words and stuff like that, you know, saying, don't F with me, blah, 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 you're out of here, blah, blah. Well, I came back a couple other times, a couple more times on, you know, kind of smoothing it out a little bit. And he was just getting madder and madder. And finally, on the last one, I thought I'd be real diplomatic. I started out, I said, since the 9/11 truthers argument kind of hangs on the idea that there's tons and tons of this residue to be found, and since we know where New York City dumped all of the scrapings that they cleaned up from downtown Manhattan, we ought to be able to go and dig anywhere in that pile and find just exactly what Stephen Jones and his group says is there. And if it isn't there, well, by golly, then they can go ahead and call Stephen Jones a liar if they want to. But I proposed a test that would solve the problem. And the guy stripped every one of my comments off of his website. He fixed it so I can't even go to his website. If I go there with my own name, it gets blocked. He's so, you know, he was so uptight and just blown away by what I had to say, I guess. Well, while we're kind of in the break here, I thought I'd let you know that if you go to the AE 9/11 Truth website, there's a new member, a new addition, and this one is a special person. His name is Tom Sullivan, and he's a former, maybe even a present, I'm not sure, I think a former CDI employee. That's Controlled Demolition, Inc., the group that cleaned up the Oklahoma City bombing, the federal building. They cleaned up the 1993 bombing of the Trade Center, and they got to clean up the 2001 site. You know, it's interesting. Now, don't expect a whistleblower type of thing. He wasn't pointing out anything that CDI was involved in, but he got together with Richard Gage, and together they walked through videos of the, you know, collapse and subsequent disintegration of the buildings, and he explains what type of explosives or charges were used in each location. Well, as you see, we've got the call-in phone numbers behind me. It's 503-288-4442 and 503-288-4448. Now we're going to go to a video. This is kind of a special one. We haven't seen anything from family members type first responders. So we're just going to go ahead and play this. Right after we come back from the video, we'll take calls. So we'll go ahead and let her rip.
Good morning. Good morning, thanks. I'm Joe Princiota. I'm an Alaskan, and I'm also a crime scene investigator. Since my father's an artist and there's art in me, I'm really an artist at heart. I approach life that way, but I have an engineering background, and I love to talk. So the attorneys liked the fact that I could build rather skillful and accurate models. In those days, the computers were just coming into 3D. Now I use the computers quite a lot and do my modeling in the computer. But I produce models that would help the attorney tell their story to the jury. To do that, I have to go to often the crime scene. I do a lot of criminal defense work. I kept a second apartment in Las Vegas for 14 years, doing a good deal of criminal defense and what we call slip and fall. People who got injured at the hotel were suing the hotel, needed to make an exhibit of how they got injured. So my career has been on artistic, communication, World's Fair communication, courtroom communication, and so a lot of crime scene investigation. So when the situation with 9/11 came about, I was fascinated by the first shock of what really was America's shock and awe. And I was overwhelmed. And I didn't like what I saw from an emotional standpoint, And from a scientific standpoint, from just the physics of watching the pulverization of these buildings, and I had done many cases where steel workers had been injured because during the assembly of a building, for some reason, a purlin, a beam, a column had failed, or the workers' support area had failed, or on one of the oil rigs there was a badly designed crane, and when it swung around, the weight on the other side of the crane swung over the handrail. And in our particular case, our man got crushed by this movement. So I was a little familiar with steel, a little familiar with building construction, a lot and too much familiar with how people die and what happens to the body. And another job my mother had there in Anchorage, Alaska, was she was coroner. So I've personally been to autopsies and all of this. As the news of 9/11 came in, the structural failure of the buildings became more odd and curious to me. And so I began to look. The French gentleman who had the search for the Boeing page with the Pentagon really impressed me that something was wrong with the story. It was later that the fact that two cousins had both firefighters, and that's that's my cousin Vincent Princiota and my cousin Sal Joseph Princiota, were both firefighters, and as a result of the issue of 9/11 on the day, Vincent had died in the South Tower with other firefighters. The firefighters lost 343 firefighters that day. Sal came to the scene late because of another assignment, and he wasn't trapped in any of the buildings. But he, as you can tell, was a bit of a bodybuilder and attacked the pile with strength, with vigor, and without stopping. And as a result, he must have inhaled quite a volume of this extremely toxic powder. Often I counsel different individuals who are part of the 9/11 Truth Movement, as I am part of the Truth Movement, but I am independent of any organization. I work closely with architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and I recommend anyone who wants to know more about this issue, that's a good place to start. Another page is just 911truth.org, but AE911truth.org will get you to architects, engineers, scientists who, like myself, have to testify in court about their expert opinion about something. And so they approach the issue of 911 with the same scientific approach. But my website is just csi911.info. I offer information. And I say I counsel some of the Truth Movement folks because with those connections, I'm in communication with a lot of folks. And I say, this is a passionate issue. We all have an idea about who did it. We all want to solve the crime. But please be careful how you speak about 911 because you can also be misled by words you've been given and you've accepted them, and one of them is dust. The buildings did not collapse into dust. Dust happens. There's dust in this room. Dust is natural. These buildings collapsed into powder. The people became powder. Powder is manufactured. These buildings did not collapse into their own footprint. These buildings powdered, pulverized, and moved outward in an explosive demolition, destruction. In addition to the Twin Towers, there's of course Building 7, with a model of which I don't have here with me today, and I apologize for that. Building 7, this is the 44th and 45th floor of these towers, was 47 stories high and collapsed later on in the afternoon after never being hit by any airplane, a few small fires. That's a building that collapsed into its own footprint. The north wall moved south. The south wall moved north. The east wall moved west. And yes, the west wall moved east. It closed like a cardboard